Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on Declarative Vaadin UIs. I'm Artur from Vaadin and with me today I have Matti, who is one of our experts on declarative layouts.
Hello everyone.
So Matti, when I went through the questions we got beforehand for this webinar, there was one that kind of stuck out that I think we could start with. What's this declarative UIs you're going to have a webinar about?
Okay, right to the basics. Yeah, so declarative feature in Vaadin 7, introduced in Vaadin 7.4 is a way for building your layouts using a declarative design. So basically, instead of writing your layout code using Java, you do your layouts by writing a template based on HTML5. But maybe the easiest way to explain what this declarative is all about is to have a look at a concrete example. So, this is how the designs done in declarative way look like. So basically, on the left-hand side, you see a basic login form, which could be in any application. And on the right-hand side, you have the declarative markup for that. So, using the declarative, you just let the framework read the layout in from a template file like this. When you look at the template, it's best to think of it that the tag names are basically mapped to classes in Vaadin. So for instance, this vertical layout here is the Vaadin vertical layout, and then the attributes map to setters and getters. And basically, using this kind of markup, you can build your layout. That's it in a nutshell, I'd say.
So this is basically like in Vaadin we had before the Java way of building layouts, UIs, and it was like the only way to build layouts. So this is a complementary way or another way of doing the same thing.
Yes, exactly. The point is that provide also, since some people prefer to build the layouts using in a more declarative way, so we want to offer something for them as well. Of course, still you can build your layouts as before using your code. It's just that you have more to choose from.
All right. Yeah. So you could build this same layout with Java, of course, like new vertical layout and add component, a new label, and so on and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All right. What is the advantage of this, would you say, this declarative format?
Well, it's a matter of preference, first of all. So for some people, it makes more sense than to others. But in my opinion, the key points here is that from the declarative syntax, you see right away that what is the actual hierarchy of your layout.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's true. You can immediately see here, like you have a vertical layout containing the label and a horizontal layout.
Exactly. And then, of course, it also makes it a bit quite easy to do modifications and test things. For instance, in case you want to test, okay, maybe I would like to have another button there. Mm-hmm. So I could just duplicate the button element here. Let's call it, register. And as you see on the left-hand side,
right, then you get another register button, yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, like this, so I'll immediately see what it looks like, and also from the markup, it's pretty easy to see that I have two buttons there, so it's a bit more easier to read. Of course, we can modify this further. Maybe we add one more layout there with a horizontal layout, and then we just move the buttons inside of the. And let's fix the typo as well. So now I'm having a horizontal layout that wraps the buttons. So it's really compact way of expressing the layout as well, as it's pretty clear in terms of a hierarchy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, okay, so you're using some v-vertical layout here. What is the reason for that? I mean, in Java you have vertical layout.
Yeah.
So what's up with this v dash that you have here?
Yeah, the v dash is basically, it tells you that this is a Vaadin core component. Okay. So basically, based on this v dash prefix, the declarative feature building the Vaadin core can look up the actual class for you. So in this case, the v basically maps to Vaadin UI package.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so you can build your declarative layout this way. It looks pretty nice, but how do you use this in your Vaadin application? I mean, what you have here, this is some kind of custom demo application.
Yeah.
Where you're just demonstrating this layout, but in reality you have your Vaadin application, that's a Java application, and you want to use this somehow. So how would you do that?
Okay, so let's have a look at an example once again. So basically, now I have the same template here as before, but now I have done some code that add listeners in the background. So basically, I can write something to the fields, try sign in, and then, as you see, I have bound some listeners to the buttons.
Okay.
So how this is actually done is first, I have created a design root component, and that extends from the root level layout in my design. So in this case, it's a vertical layout. So you have to do this one, and then you annotate it with a design root annotation, which tells the framework that this is your root layout component in your design. And finally, in constructor, you just call design.read and pass this as a parameter. And this is basically all you need to do in order to get your design read into the component. And
okay,
after
so
that,
you have the design actually as an HTML file here somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. This is your Java file.
Yeah, the design HTML file is named exactly the same way than the class file here. So login view layout, but it's just a .html, and it's just there as a regular HTML file template on the server side. So this is the way you can read in, and furthermore, if then of course you want to add some listeners to your components. So when after calling the design read, all the components are populated inside of this vertical layout here automatically, but of course you want to access the fields, and for that you can define fields in your design root component like this. And then how will these fields will be mapped to the actual components inside the vertical layout? The way the framework does this is that it looks for the names of the fields, for example, the email field here. And then if we go and have a look from the corresponding field into the template, it has an underscore ID attribute, which we refer to as usually as a local ID. So basically when the framework goes through the template, it just checks that there's an attribute underscore ID and with this value, and then it just finds the corresponding field from the Java class, and it automatically maps the field to the correct element.
Okay, so this underscore ID, it's just meant for this purpose. I mean, it has no other side effect. You don't configure the component in any way with this local ID, so it's just used for mapping to this Java file, right?
Yes, exactly. Just to be used by the declarative for the framework. Of course, at this point, it could be also mentioned that you could use a couple of other ways to map. So basically, in addition to this local ID, you could use ID attribute. But then as a side effect, you end up having an ID for your corresponding DOM element. on the client side. Or you could even map based on captions, but let's say that I would consider it as a best practice to use those local IDs instead if there is no specific reasons to do it otherwise. So underscore ID.
Yeah, the caption can be quite fragile if you start binding based on that. I mean, in some cases it can be probably useful, easy, but if you have some internationalization or whatever in your application, it can become quite tricky and otherwise fragile also.
Yes. So, this is the way you get your fields mapped from your design, but of course, you want to do something with them. You were asking about, let's say, listeners.
Yeah.
So, basically, what you can do when you're using the root design, you just create a new instance of it. At this point, the framework creates the layout for you inside of it.
So what you're doing, your logging view layout, it's basically like a custom component that encapsulates this declarative definition.
Yes. So from this point of view, it doesn't matter for you whether it's actually based on a design or not. You're just dealing with a normal Vaadin component that has some fields.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, you can just assign click listeners to the fields which are visible for you.
Yeah, right. You're just accessing the fields the way you would do if it was
like with any component.
made with Java, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We were talking about captions. We have a question from Signell Attila, who has been asking already, what about localizing captions and other pieces? Well, if you are localizing captions, you certainly don't want to bind according to the captions.
Sure.
But do we have some other way? Do we have some way of doing localization in our declarative format?
At the moment, no. So basically, if you want to do localizations, you can still put your fields available from your design component as before, and then you can just access and put the actual captions in place in your Java code as before.
Yeah, so it's pretty much the same as if you code with Java, you can do internationalization in the same way. So there's no special support for that yet, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, that could be something that we might consider in the future adding there, since it's kind of a basic feature in templates in many places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was another question also already before this webinar. It was related to Clara and the Clara add-on. And the question was basically, how does this relate to the Clara add-on?
Well, yeah, basically it does the same thing, but the format is different. So Clara was based on XML, and this is HTML5. And of course, since we are building this inside of the framework, we can provide a bit more flexible and more feature-rich support for different components, since we can actually modify the source code of the components itself to support it better.
Mm-hmm. So I think you mentioned it, that the attributes here, like spacing, they are like directly mapped to Java setters, like set spacing. It's a Boolean attribute here.
Yep.
And this is the same thing that Clara is based on also. But I think in addition to this, we have quite a few more features here. So it's like Clara has this basic setter-getter feature, automatic mapping, and in this format we have the automated mapping plus some more to support all the components in a better way.
True.
Yeah. So there's actually
one example, for example, here for the we can have attributes like expand races and alignments defined in line for the components. We can support setters and getters that are not that doesn't actually, let's say you can set something using a different data type than the corresponding getter, and you can still make it work by just modifying the components. and has not been possible with Clara, since it really can't modify the internals of the components. So
yeah, so Clara actually has this namespace for modifying like parent attributes, which is kind of similar to the colon we're using here. So colon is like a reserved prefix that says the attribute is actually or owned by the parent tag, like expand and left. So it's related to the parent tag and this given child component. But
yes.
Another thing we have here, of course, if you look at the label, you're actually writing HTML inside the label here. So I don't know if that's possible with Clara, but it's possible here for sure.
True.
Okay, so we looked at how to use this in your Java code and how you can add a listener to this. But let's talk a bit about declarative format and data. So you always have data for your components. You can have static data, you can have data from the database, or you can have, well, dynamic data from somewhere else. So how does this relate to the declarative format?
Yeah, of course, it's a basic use case for certain type of components. So basically selects, tables, you name it. So we have to support it somehow. So let's start from the static data. So basically, some cases, let's say an option group is a typical thing where you know the available options beforehand. So you can basically kind of hard code those. So for those cases, the declarative feature in Vaadin supports inline data. So for example, here you have an option group. Again, you notice that it's pretty easy to see what's on the left-hand side just with a quick glance. So it's an option group, and then it has 3 options, which are static here, so inline data. It's pretty easy to just, let's say, add one more, like this. So basically, you can define what are the actual inline the options for your option group, like this.
Yeah, that's cool.
Currently, this is supported by abstract selects, but in the future, similar kind of support will be added for table and grid and other components as well.
Yeah, so this is actually something that one of the product teams are working on at the moment to add this similar support for grid for 7.5. So then and for table also, so that it will be possible to specify static inline data for these components also. So right now it's limited then to option group and box, list select, all these abstract selects we have.
Yeah. But that's for the inline data, the static part. You also ask about the dynamic part. So we have another example for
Can you
this.
actually go back? I have one question. Sure. Can you use HTML inside these options? So can you bold the first, for instance?
Let's try. Now I have to admit that I'm not completely sure whether that's implemented. No.
So we have actually a question from Artur that is it possible to use generic HTML elements anywhere you like? No. And this looks like it's not possible to use them anywhere. So
yes, not anywhere. Basically, even though we are dealing with the HTML5 template, but you have to keep in mind that this is a server-side feature. So basically, a way to tell to the Vaadin framework that how your layout should look like. So this is not something that would be pushed to the browser as such. So in that case, it has to be something that the framework understands. So no custom HTML.
So even though it looks like HTML, it's actually processed on the server side.
Yes.
And this very file that you're writing here, it doesn't end up in the browser.
No.
So it's just like translated on the server into a component hierarchy
Yes.
Yeah.
And just that we have chosen it to be HTML5 format, but it really doesn't match one-to-one that we would be using a browser, that any browser would be parsing it, so it's just the internal data presentation to build a declarative markup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been talks every now and then about we should support HTML anywhere in this format, even though it's server-side, but it's not something that we have support for today, but maybe someday in the future. And actually, if you go back to the basics example where you have the HTML in the label, there are some cases where you don't want this HTML to be interpreted as HTML. So there's actually an attribute for VLabel that's plain text that you can set. And if you do this, then suddenly the contents of the label will be interpreted as text instead of HTML. So it's, I mean, typically when you do the declarative layout and do a static label, it doesn't matter. If you get the label contents from the database, you sometimes want to be sure that this is just text and not HTML, so to avoid any injections and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And this is supported in some components, I would say this plain text.
Yes.
Basically where it makes most sense, like label. And button works the same way.
Yeah. Basically you could check the corresponding API for the actual Java component, and from there you can pretty much deduce where it's supported and where it's not. So basically the component must have a mode that supports data in that form.
Yeah, that actually brings me to another question that we got, that I mean, most of these attributes are mapped to Java methods like set spacing.
Yep.
Well, plain text is not mapped to a Java attribute. There's no set plain text in label, but it's a special case in label that label explicitly, well, supports this, even though it's not directly mapped to a setter. So how can you actually know what's supported and what's not? Because this seems to be a problem at the moment.
Yeah, the truth is that the documentation for all the features provided by the declarative is not yet that complete. There is still some documentation available in the book of Vaadin, but it's at the moment it's quite high level. But there will be component-specific documentations at some point, which will then help you to really find all the supported attributes. So at the moment, your best bet is just to try out things and make sure, and usually using the pattern that the attributes actually match to the setters in most cases.
Yeah, so if you look at the Java doc, you can find the setters, of course, and then you can see what the attribute is. So it's converted to dash separated instead of camel case to be more like HTML. But yeah, that will be improved at some point in the future, hopefully in the very near future.
Yeah.
Okay, so but you were talking about, or going to talk about grid.
Yes, let's have a grid, for instance, since it's a cool new feature in Vaadin. So let's use it as an example here as well. So in order to add dynamic data, you can just define your layout as shown in the previous examples, but here you just add a grid component here. But since now you are dealing with dynamic data, you are not actually supposed to specify the data in the template. But instead, what you can do is to just make sure that you have this magical local ID attribute here, so that you can actually get access to the corresponding grid component in your server-side code. And then reading the template was shown you before, so nothing new there, but then you can just access the grid and set the container data source as for any component.
Okay, so it's
no different.
It's no different than coding with Java, just set a container and you're done with it.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. The declarative is more on specifying the layout for your components, but then after doing that declarative way, you still can work with the components exactly the same way than they were built with that just plain Java coding one.
Or if you to put it into other words, there's no special support for containers in the declarative format. So there's no way to like declaratively define the database it should connect to or something like this.
No, nothing like that at the moment. And I guess it would be quite of a dynamic use case anyways to come up with the specification that covers all the possible ways to get data into the component.
Yeah. That's true. That it's typically you have some special needs and it's easier to express them with Java than with some made-up declarative syntax. Okay, Dimitri has also asked a question about this example project that or the demo you're showing here, that if the sources are available somewhere.
Yeah, sure. The whole example project is at the moment even available in GitHub. Just browse to the Vaadin organization page, and from there you find this example project. It's a declarative samples is the name for the project. Just check it out and see what's inside of it. It's exactly the same code I'm using here in the examples.
Cool. What about this thing that we have this directory with a lot of add-ons, and can you use these also with this declarative format, and how can you use these with the declarative format? I think that's a really interesting topic because you get quite far with the built-in components that we have been looking at so far, but every now and then you get to the point that this add-on looks nice. And of course, if you do this declaratively, you want to use the add-on also in a declarative way. So how could you do that?
Yes, sure. It's a pretty typical use case with all the add-ons in directory, and there's also some other use cases for that. But let's have a look first an example with the spreadsheet. So spreadsheet is one of our new commercial add-ons, which has some built-in support for declarative as well. But the main principle for using all add-ons is basically the same. So what you need to do is that you need to define a package mapping in your template file header. And the mapping is basically so that you add a meta tag with name attribute package mapping. And then you have a content attribute saying that add-on colon and then com Vaadin add-on spreadsheet. So to open this up, this add-on will be the prefix you will be using in the tags that should be, that basically is to denote the classes in your add-on. And then the latter part here is the actual package name for the classes. So basically, when the framework encounters tag like this, it knows that, okay, hey, this has a prefix add-on, which maps to this package, com Vaadin add-on spreadsheet, and then it tries to find the class name spreadsheet there. So basically, using this type of syntax, you can pretty much add any component that extends a Vaadin abstract component to your design. And in the case of spreadsheet, there is some built-in support, so you can use the features of the spreadsheet pretty widely by just then adding attributes for these elements. Of course, then if you're taking any add-on from directory that doesn't have any specific support for declarative.
That's the most typical case.
I guess so, yes. So for still the same rules apply. So basically you need to declare a package mapping, and then you can add the element to your design like that. But then which attributes are supported? So basically the declarative feature has a built-in support done with reflection, so that you can automatically use attributes for all primitive type setter getter pairs. So basically, if you have a setter for a boolean, integer, double, and you have, then you can use those as an attributes using the same naming convention here. Some special cases in addition to primitives is dates, then resources. So at least you get some level of support out of the box for them, and then it's up to you whether you are in control of the code for the add-on, so you might make a better support, or then you can just configure it from your Java code.
Yeah, of course, you get the reference to the component anyway. So if there's something that you can't configure declaratively, you can always do it in code.
Yes, and you can always put your component in non-configured components in your layout anyway. So you can use any add-on with this type of a technique.
Yeah, I mean, here you're using spreadsheet, which has special support, but you're not using the special support in any way. You're just using basic attributes. So,
this would work for any add-on.
Yeah. True. Cool. So the add-on part here, it's like what you made up. So you could just name it ABC or foobar instead.
Yeah. It's just a prefix.
So it's just used within this file to identify what component should actually be used.
Yes. So the core part is that it just tells the framework that this is the package for the corresponding classes that have this prefix. So we started with at some point by talking about this V dash thing. So this map V is actually automatically mapped to the Vaadin UI package. So
which coincidentally contains all the Vaadin framework components.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Khalid has also asked that what about IDE support for this?
Well, at the moment there is no need for specific IDE support, I think. It's just an HTML5 template file you are editing, so it doesn't matter which IDE you prefer to use when writing the templates, and they work.
One thing that some people have been asking about is like code completion. Can you get code completion to work for the tags for the attributes?
Yes, so that would basically require that we would have a scheme for the template, and we don't have that. And since it's HTML5, it's not very likely that we will have a scheme for that. And the code completion in the case of add-ons would be extremely hard to come up with, since you can basically support any attributes in any elements. So
I mean, sure, we could make some IDE support, like not rely on the HTML editor or the scheme itself, relying on Java classes and doing this code completion ourselves, but it's not something we have planned at the moment. Not something we have, and not something we have planned. And the problem with the scheme also is if you have add-ons, then you would need the add-on scheme from somewhere. I think maybe you could auto-generate this somehow, but it's not something that we have today.
Yes, no plans at the moment.
Of course, what we are working on is the Vaadin Designer, which coincidentally uses this same declarative format. And well, Vaadin Designer of course has all kinds of features that makes it easier, so you don't have to write this by hand if you want to just drag and drop components instead and have like a property editor for the attributes. So that's like code completion in one way also.
Yeah, sure. And it's also one of the motivations behind coming up with a declarative is that we can now actually store our layouts in some other form than just generate Java code. So this is far more you don't break this that easily than you would break auto-generated Java code by modifying things.
Yeah, auto-generated Java code that you're not supposed to touch and still go and touch and make some changes here and there. It becomes quite messy quite quickly. That's true.
So this is well defined in that sense, so you can do bi-directional editing if you want, so you can add elements by hand or then with the designer, so it provides you lots of flexibility.
Yeah. So when you do a real application, you don't do the whole application as one declarative layout or one Java layout. You have separate parts, and you want to use these parts from other parts, and you quite quickly get to the point that you want to embed a declarative UI inside a declarative UI, and maybe embed that declarative UI in another declarative UI. So if you make a CRUD application, you would have a grid, you maybe have a form below it, and this is like the main layout, and then maybe the form is designed as a separate layout. So maybe we could have a look at how you can accomplish this.
Yes. So let's have a look of a nested example.
Oh,
exactly.
Look,
as
you have a CRUD.
Yes, surprisingly. So here you have a grid, and then something that a group of fields below it, just that enables you to edit the data, or actually add data to the grid in this case. So what is actually a nested design here is the part with the fields. So here you see the root design for this layout. So it has a vertical layout, the grid, and then this one component that contains the fields. And this particular editor field layout is actually a design itself. So it has an own HTML design file for it. And nesting is as easy as adding any add-on basically. So you just have to do a package mapping again, in this case Vaadin Declarative Demo, which is the package name for this demo. And then you have the class name with this syntax. So the frameworks can then instantiate it, and even it doesn't really matter whether the component is actually based on a design or not. So as with the previous examples, you can use components that are actually design root components in a very similar way than any other component. So it's really no different.
Of course, you need to have for this editor field layout, you need to have the Java file also. You can't use a design like the HTML file directly in another HTML file.
Yeah, true.
So I guess if we look at the code here, you have this. Yeah, true. This is the form part.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the form part there. So it has.
Yeah. So it's like a normal component that you're just using in the other layout.
Yeah. So it's really encapsulated in a way that from outside of the component based on a design, you really don't need to. It's actually built using Java or reading the declarative template in. So it doesn't. It is by no means different.
Yeah. And coincidentally, Vaadin Designer will of course auto-generate this file for you, so you don't have to write it by hand if you happen to use that.
Yes.
I guess in here you have written this by hand.
Yeah. From this particular example is written by me by hand, but since you can see it's not really that much of text either. Of course, when you come to the more complex layouts and more complex designs, then the designer will really start making more sense to use it. Yeah. And of course, it's a WYSIWYG, so it has its own benefits there. But for simple cases, you can do it easily by hand.
Yeah, sure. But how would you bind logic here to the save button, for instance?
Well, basically, it's the same. What are you asking? Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to make logic inside this form.
Yeah.
Here, I guess you have made all the logic in like the view that's using both the main form and the nested form. But I guess in a typical case, you would want to encapsulate some logic in this form itself.
Yep.
and not like.
Oh, yes.
So now you're like making all the fields available for where
Yeah.
the form is used,
Yep.
and you have the logic there. But what if you want to encapsulate the logic also in this form?
Yeah, that's another way to do it, and might be even more common use case that I'm using now in my example. So instead of using the accessing the fields from outside of the actual, let's take this as an example. So you could also extend from here and then add your logic inside of the same design root component and encapsulate. You could even make those fields private if you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess you could add, if you really want, you could add the logic directly to this class also.
Yes, as well.
Of course, if you use designer, this would not be a good idea because this is overwritten and regenerated, but extending it would work very well, yeah. That's true.
So you have plenty of ways to use it. The way I'm doing it in this demo is just one of them. So it's up to you how you want to actually build your structure for your code.
Okay, let's see if we have some other questions. We have from UpGetto a question, is it possible to authenticate declarative layout with Spring Framework? Is this actually declarative format related to this Spring or authentication in any way?
In my opinion, not really, since the authentication related things are more like application level things. The declarative is only about giving you a declarative way to build your layout structure, and it really has nothing to do with the actual business logic in your application.
Yeah, so you could have like your Spring view and there you would just use this declarative layout, and the authentication would work the same way as it does with, if you would do it with Java code. So
in the end, the components, having the declarative markup are just components. So you can use them as building pieces for your application.
all right. I think that was actually the last question we had. And I think we have covered also quite a lot of the features that are in the declarative support today in 7.4. Or did you have anything that we missed that we still should talk about?
I think we covered most of the most important things.
Yeah, I agree. And today we're actually working for 7.5 for, like we said, grid. We're working on static data for table, tree table, some of the more complex components. I think menu bar, you can't define the menu structure inline in 7.4. You will be able to do that in 7.5, and there's a lot of these small things that needs to be customized for each component. So most of the, or all of the basic stuff is available in 7.4. There will be some even more stuff in 7.5, and then this would be really awesome. It's awesome already today.
Yes.
Okay, but we have no more questions, so let's just wrap this up. Thank you for watching, and
thank you.
Go to GitHub, check out the demos repository that Matti made. Check out our tutorials. Book of Vaadin will have some info on this pretty soon, so have fun, test it, and see what you think. And post your ideas and questions still to the forum. We will monitor the thread even after this, so we will try to answer any questions you have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.